G'day friends. Now, a lot of people are getting on the back of these Q types that actually believe that, Donald Trump is here to save them and that there's an inside, white hat type of organisation within the government that's going to take down the deep state and that everything's just going to be fine. Just trust the plan. But, people that look into things a bit more deeply or that have been around a bit longer can see that this is just a government operation to act as a limited hangout. So what happens in effect is that the people that believe these things, they get stopped in a like an echo chamber. So they camp at a certain level of truth and finding out what needs to be done. And even people who call themselves Christians, laugh at these people. But they are suffering within a limited hangout themselves. And it's probably the last of the limited hangouts. And what it is they think they're a Christian. They think they're a Christian. So if you think you're a Christian, or if other people think they're a Christian, what happens is they think that they have the final piece of the puzzle and that they can just sit and camp on what they know, and they think that that's all they have to do. But Jesus said only the doers of the word and not the hearers might be saved. What he's saying is that just because you might think that Jesus is the Son of God and that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, and you believe in what's written in the Bible and all of that, just because you do that, Jesus is saying that's just a hearer. That's just, okay, you've heard that, you know that, but what are you going to do about it? What are you doing about it? That's the thing. It's not enough just to be a hearer. Okay? And what you have to do about it is what Jesus said to do. He didn't just say, you've got to know about me and all that, like it's true, which it is. But he said you've got to do the word. Do what I say. And so what there is a phenomenon. You've heard of the Republicans in name only, the rhinos or whatever. These are the sinos, the chinos, the Christians in name only. Okay, they call themselves Christians, but they're not doing what Jesus said. So can you really say that someone's a Christian if they're not doing what Jesus says? Can you really call them a Christian? Or what Jesus called them, a hearer, not a doer of the word, just a hearer. So the question is, what did Jesus tell the people to do? What did he tell them to do? Well, he said that you weren't to apply to men that call themselves benefactors, but who exercise authority one over the other. Okay, that means you're not supposed to go to the governments of the world that provide for your welfare by force, by ruling over one another. Okay, so he said not to do that. But what do we do for a Christian? Oh, well, let's just start a 501c3 church and ask the government for tax benefits and all this type of thing. So that's one example of what Jesus said not to do, is apply to the government for benefits. Okay, because once you do that, a lot of people are quick to criticise the system, but they are happy to keep participating in the system. And Jesus said, you were not to be that way. He said that the way of Christ, his system, was to provide for the needy by way of charity, which in the Old Testament was called free will offerings. So if you force someone else to pay tax for your benefit, that's kind of like, not the right way. It's socialism. And most so-called Christians would say socialism is not a good thing. but they don't realise that they're doing it just by participating in the system. So, what did Jesus actually say to do about this? Okay, well, what he did was he set up a network of ministers that served the people with health and welfare and education, and they received charity from them. They received a sacrifice from them, which that's a synonym for a tax, okay? Because that's a sacrifice. You sacrifice part of your labour by way of a tax. But the difference between the way of Christ and the system is that these taxes that go to provide the benefits for the needy of the society, the taxes of the system are forced from you because you don't want to give them, because that's the state you're in. That's the spiritual state you're in. That's, you're still selfish. Whereas people that believe in the truth, that believe in love, don't need to be forced to sacrifice part of their own blood, sweat and tears for the benefit of the needy of their society. You see, so it's because we have to be forced that force is put upon us. But Jesus said, if you just sacrifice freely in charity, the ministers are there to receive that sacrifice and to help the needy of the society that you're a part of. And that's the first step to being free. That's a foundation of a free society, because it's no use trying to go off and become rich and get property and do all those things. It's no use doing that if some of the needy of your society, the people you love, you love your neighbour, is what Jesus said. It's no use trying to go and get rich and all that stuff before the needy of society are taken care of. Okay, because, what are you going to do? Get rich and just look at them sleeping in the gutter? So Jesus said this must be done as the foundation. And then, once that's taken care of, then you can go off and, become wealthy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that there is something wrong with going off and becoming wealthy and forgetting about the needy of society. That's where a lot of these communists think capitalism is a dirty word, because they think, those rich people, they don't care about the poor about us and all that. And they're right in a certain sense. Okay. But Jesus said to take care of the needy in a righteous way. He didn't just say, like the social security systems of the world, just fill out a form and there's your money. No, the ministers that he set up would know the people personally that needed help, and they would use the discernment and the the Holy Spirit to know, are these people just taking advantage of the system or not? Is it best to give them money, or is it best to try and help them find work or try and get them healthy again, so they're in a position to produce? So that he said to weaken the poor, so not to he said to strengthen the poor, not to weaken the poor, like what happens in the social security systems of the world. They weaken the poor because they give them something for nothing. But the way Jesus organised society to ministrate to these people, he set up a network of ministers that looked after 10 families. Okay, so one minister would look after 10 families. So the families themselves, the elders of the family, the head of the house, would be a producer, a free man who would produce and would be a king and a priest to his house. And that would be, his children and his children's children and everyone in his family. So one minister would look after him and his family if there were any needs, and 9 other families like him. Okay, so there were 10 families to one minister, and that's why that minister was called a deacon. Okay, deacon comes from the word deca, which means 10. Okay, so there were 10 families. Now, this is like keep it in mind, this is like a fractal network. So there's 10 families, one minister looking after 10 families. Now, out of those, that's one minister. So then there'd be other ministers that were looking after other 10 families. So then you had 10 ministers in a congregation, and there would be a minister that looked after those ministers, and that minister would be called a bishop. And you'll find this word bishop in the New Testament. So this bishop would be a minister of ministers, you see. So just by the service of this bishop, they would be looking after 100 families. Okay, so because there's 10 families for one minister, then there's 10 ministers. So 10 ministers would represent 100 families, and the bishop would look after 100 families. Then there would be 10 bishops, and then there'd be a bishop of the bishop. Call it maybe an archbishop. Okay, and you see these patterns permeating down through history, like you might have heard these terms from, say, the Catholic Church, where they got a few ideas and slapped them all together and set up it's really an imposter to the real church, because there's other things in the Catholic Church that don't really conform to what Jesus was saying. And the Catholic Church was really started by the Emperor Constantine, which he saw that Christianity was growing, and he wanted to sort of co-opt that, and he took some of the terms into this Catholic Church that he formed, priests and bishops and all that stuff. So, but I'm not talking about the Catholic Church. I'm talking about what's written in the New Testament. Okay, so this is where you get the concept of tens, hundreds, and thousands. So the leaders, all these servants, the ministers, weren't they weren't ruling over you. They were there to serve, and Jesus was a king of that kingdom, and he came to serve, not to rule by force. So what would happen is the elder of the house, the king of his own castle, the king and the priest of the family would control what he gave to the minister, because that's his right. That's his free will to choose. The minister couldn't go and tell him, look, you've got to pay X% of your income. No, because that's not a free society. At that point there, the society becomes a tyranny, because because power corrupts, and then the ministers of the ministers can start to dictate how much of a percentage you have to give. And that is the way of the world. And Jesus came to show the alternative to that. So the elder of the house gets to decide what amount to give to a minister, because it's a free will offering. Okay, and you've heard the word tithe. Okay, tithe from 10. Okay, it's not necessarily a tenth of your income written in a contract that you must give. Okay, it's from the word tithe means of 10. So there were 10 families in a congregation, and the minister would receive a sacrifice from each of those 10 families. So that was known as a tithe. Okay, and you could use that as a rule of thumb to give 10% of your income to the minister. That's up to you. But the deeper principle is that you decide. You cannot be forced to give what the minister tells you to give, or what anyone tells you to give. You can only give what God tells you to give by the Holy Spirit in your heart or in your conscience, whichever way you want to describe it. So that's how a free society is formed, at the very grassroots level, with the simple choice, with the simple right to choose how much you give. And you ought to give, because that's what people that love their neighbour do. Okay, so that's how grassroots the plan of Christ was. And unless that particular layer is covered by all these different guys that are trying to bring out these schemes, and like, God bless them, because they're trying to think of alternatives. You've got the Propitarians over this side, and you've got the other guys on this side. They're all trying to figure out ways to do things, but Jesus already invented the wheel. We've just got to conform to what he said, and it's got to be built on a grassroots level, to the point where no one can force you what to give, because that's your right to decide. That's your exousia, your right to choose, and that's liberty, and that's the perfect law of liberty, that no one can tell you what to do, and you can't tell anyone else what to do either. Excuse me. So Jesus' kingdom is built on the perfect law of liberty, where every man has the right to choose, and that comes down to what he does with the product of his labour. So join the network, go to Preparing You, learn more about what Jesus was talking about. It's a very practical way to set up society, and it is the only way to set up society if every man is going to be free that is in that society. So go to Preparing You. I'll see you there, and until next time, peace.